In Great Depression era Cleveland, Ohio, a macabre killer was on the loose who would come to be known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. On September 5th, 1934, at 8 a.m. in the morning at Lake Erie, a man walking the shoreline discovers the dismembered bottom half of a woman's body. It appeared that it had been cut with knives, and a chemical agent was used, discoloring the body to a reddish color and tanning the skin like hide. The head, hands, and identifying body parts were missing, no match to any missing persons. This was to be dubbed the Lady in the Lake. Approximately a little over a year later, on September 24th, 1935, two teen boys were playing catch in Kingsbury Run when they stumbled over the bodies of two men lying amongst bushes and weeds at the bottom of a hill. Both bodies were mutilated. The heads were found buried close by. No indications of blood were found at the scene, leading investigators to conclude that this was a dump site. Due to the location, it was ascertained that the bodies were carried a considerable distance. So the killers had to have had strength and endurance. These two men were castrated. Autopsies revealed one victim was deceased for over a week, the other only 3 days. The younger victim was alive when his head was separated from his body. The younger man was identified as Edward Ardercy. 3 months later, Elliot Ness was assigned the position of safety director. Early 1936, in a factory yard on the east side of 20th Street, police discovered two baskets containing the dismembered partial torso, two thighs, and a hand of a woman wrapped in newspaper. The rest of her body was discovered 2 weeks later, a few blocks away, when the snow receded. The head remained missing. Fingerprints taken from this lady identified the victim as Florence Pagliolio. Florence had a record for solicitation. June 5th, 1936. Two boys skipping school to go fishing discover a bundle of discarded garments under a tree on Kingsbury Run. When they poked the bundle with their fishing rods, they discovered the decapitated head of a young man. The next day, the body was discovered a few hundred yards away, close to where the first two men were previously found in September of 1935. The head was photographed and published in the paper and put on display in the morgue so that people could view it in hopes of identifying the victim. He was tattooed, he had a butterfly, and he also had Paul and Helen on his forearm, an anchor, and also an anchor tattoo on his ankle. July 1936, the body of a headless man was discovered in the woods on Cleveland's west side, deceased for 2 months, but never identified. September 1936, the severed torso of a man was fished out of a stagnant waterway in Kingsbury Run. The remains were never identified. By this point, the press and public grow impatient and are critical of law enforcement. The whole city is in terror by then. September 15th, an emergency conference of over 30 scientists and detectives at the Central Police Station are gathered to collaborate over theories about the killer. The press was also invited to observe. The coroner clarified what was known and the link between the crimes. This was a case conference. Their conclusions were: 1. The suspect knew the area well. 2. The suspect was used to handling knives. 3. The suspect was strong because he carried victims to the dump sites. 4, may possibly have had medical knowledge or a background in anatomy and physiology due to the dismemberment. 5, could be a butcher, doctor, or hunter. At this point, Elliot Ness and Detective Peter Murillo were in attendance, but had not yet been put on the case, but would end up leading it. September 10, 1936, Detective Peter Murillo, 17-year veteran of the police department, was officially assigned to take over the investigation by the police chief himself. Peter was a Ukrainian immigrant that was fluent in several East European languages. It was believed that he would be able to interview more people and pick up leads that may aid in identifying some of the unidentified victims. At this point, Safety Director Elliot Ness was ordered by the mayor of Cleveland to supervise the investigation. February 1937, another torso of an unidentified female washed up on the shores of Lake Erie. June 1937, a burlap sack of bones was discovered under a bridge. The victim was deceased for approximately a year and was that of an African American female. July 1937, the headless body of a man was retrieved out of the Cuyahoga River. No pattern, only 2 IDs. Was this an opportunistic killer? Murillo believed possibly a hobo. 10 of the victims were drifters, and by June 1940, the tally came to 12 in total. At this point, Elliot Ness had narrowed things down to a suspect. The name of the suspect was Dr. Francis Edward Sweeney, who was an alcoholic and a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, Ness secretly interviewed this man in a hotel room with one polygraph examiner for a week. For the first 3 days, the man was so drunk that he had to dry out. Now, they got these tips based on a homeless man's account of a doctor that offered him a meal and a pair of shoes. The man was said to be eating the meal that this doctor had provided him with, and he became very lightheaded, so he became suspicious and took off. He described Dr. Sweeney's surgical clinic, which was also adjacent to a funeral home. Now, Sweeney's polygraph results pointed at guilt because he failed, but due to the fact that it's inadmissible in court, there was nothing that could be done. Elliot Ness actually told him he was pretty sure that it was him, which at that point in the interview at the end, Sweeney said, "Prove it." Early August 18, 1938, Elliot Ness leads a raid of Kingsbury run shantytown. They arrest people for any criminal activity. The arrests were 63 in total. They then burned down shantytown. Now, burning down shantytowns around Cleveland in order to deprive the serial killer of his next victim pool, causing resettlement and homelessness. The press and the public were not happy. After a few days, Ness ordered Peter Murillo and other detectives to raid the houses and tenements around Kingsbury Run using a legal loophole where fire inspectors are allowed to search properties without search warrants. So paired up like an officer with a fire inspector, and then they would go into these different housing areas looking for any and all signs of the killer. Before they could finish searching, the press caught on and the search was called off. Now, as far as everything's concerned, this was never solved. It was the case that really messed with Elliot Ness, and he ended up dying of cirrhosis of the liver in 1957. And Sweeney up until that point, kept sending him teasing little jibes and letters. Uh, he sent postcards suggesting that he had accomplices, and the killings actually ended in August 1938. But between the 1920s and the 1950s, Cleveland had 12 of these. They say up to 20 victims of this serial killer. There were also some in Youngstown and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Uh, Peter Murillo continued following this case until 1964 when he died. And that's when he tied in the July 5th, 1934 murder of the lady in the lake with one of a Robert Robertson found in 1950 on the 22nd of July. Murillo also believed that B&O Railways connected torso murders in Cleveland with the ones in western Pennsylvania, Newcastle, and McKees Rocks, and there possibly was a second killer, a railroad worker or hobo. The Pennsylvania torso murders, murder swamp killers, we'll be looking into further down the road, as well as I might go into the ones in the 1920s in Portland, Oregon. But that is all for now. Have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, wherever you may be. Many blessings.